call the February 15th, 2011 City Council meeting to order. Will you please rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please call the roll.
Council Agency Member Francisco.
Here.
Hotchkiss.
Here.
House. Rouse. Here. Self. White.
Here.
Mayor Chair Schneider.
Here. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No, there aren't, Madam Mayor.
Okay. We can move over to public comment. There are 2 minutes here up at the podium. We're going to start with Kenneth Locke, to be followed by David Daniel Diaz.
My name is Kenneth Locke. I've been doing some more work on my tennis website for Tennaissance, the Renaissance of tennis. I have the address Tennaissance, which is spelled with 2 S's, ANCE.net. And on there, I got into, as I mentioned to you last time about the soundness of mind and body, I got into the idea of integrity in relation to the integration of the mind and body. And then I got into the idea of purpose. The basis of now what Tennaissance can provide is the opportunity to understand how the purpose of tennis is actually served. So, and then the idea of the truth concerning tennis. It's based on the knowledge which is completely integrated and intelligent in relation to the whole body. I kind of have the monopoly on that. And then I just started a page today called Set Free. And then the idea of what I can actually provide, say this community or individuals, is the ability to recognize the difference between an individual who is free, who knows the truth, lives the truth, versus a person who is a slave, who does not know the truth and does not do the truth. And it's just kind of funny. I used an example of like a Roger Federer. I don't know if the first will be last type of situation, but Roger's position right now, he's first, but in relation to those who don't know the truth or do the truth, who are free, and I'm here to help him as well as everybody else. And I hope you can use this as a parallel to understand your positions as leaders in this community and providing the best service to this community. Thank you.
David Daniel Diaz will be followed by Carolyn Renard.
Hello, Mayor and Board. Hello, Santa Barbara. How are we doing today? I was doing more research with regards to the bike path on East Beach and bicycles with little motors on them and Segways. Basically, the bicycles with the little gasoline motors on them are legal until they are turned on. And they create a problem because they make a lot of noise and they're very quick. Now, with regards to the Segway, there's no state law, but I was told by researching and even talking to some people in Sacramento that the City Council can create ordinances that would prohibit Segways on the bike path. We have the sidewalk next to the street along the beach, and we have the bike path. And I've been running into more grandparents who are concerned about their grandkids on the bike paths there along the beach because the Segways are quick. In theory, they go no more than 12.1 miles an hour, but that's pretty quick when there's little kids on little bicycles, and it's pretty intimidating. Hopefully, the City Council can perhaps consider doing something like an ordinance. I think that'd be a great idea to keep anything, whether it's electric or gasoline, off the bike paths for the safety of our tourists and locals. Secondly and lastly, I was discussing and researching the 0-100 block of West and East Haley. There's signs that signify taxi cabs park there between 9:30 and 3 only in the commercial spaces and green spaces. They're never parked there because they're always on State Street. Everybody wants to hang out on State Street. So since the cabs aren't there, maybe the city should consider eliminating those signs so there'd be more public and tourist access to parking in the downtown area in the evening. And there is still a problem. The PD has confirmed that the cab drivers are blocking the bike path still and this and that, and maybe they should get together in groups of 2 or 3 and just show up and give tickets to 2 or 3 cab drivers all at once, because it is monotonous, and they do give bicycle riders a lot of
Wind
flack
up,
when
please.
they're concerned. Have a good day.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Carolyn Renard will be followed by Andrea Roslinski. And the final speaker will be Kate Smith.
I'm back here for a third week in a row. I asked you guys to put an item on the agenda, and I see it's not on there again. And I'll be back next week when it's not on there next week. The item that I asked you to put on had to do with an elderly man who came to this council meeting probably about 3 weeks ago now. He had been he had been protesting abuse at a local convalescent home. He was arrested. The owner apparently called the police and had him arrested for trespassing. So instead of the owner going to jail for what was going on there, this advocate, this elderly man, was booked into jail. Now he has a hearing coming up. And I told, as I mentioned to the council when I asked that this be put on the agenda, the police department is following council's policies when they do things like that. If Chief Cam Sanchez didn't follow the council's policies, he'd be fired. He's clearly doing what you guys want him to do, and the responsibility needs to be clear. You need to take the responsibility that's yours. I've met Captain Sanchez. I believe he's a good person. And I've met other officers. I believe we have a good police force. I don't think they like to be doing some of the things that are happening in this community now, like what's happening to a lot of the homeless people. I don't think that they really like to be doing that. But, if they don't, then if they don't, then Cam Sanchez gets fired, because they do what you want them to do. And, so far as I'm concerned, whatever the police do, unless it's a really outrageous act, is done at the direction of the city council. It's really your responsibility what happens in this community. And I see, I also know that the patrol officers don't even get paid for
Please
their
wind up.
lunch breaks. They, a lot of
Wind up,
times,
please.
even have to work on their lunch breaks. And I see you're spending $2 million in redevelopment money to redesign the green area in front of the library.
If you'd like
When
to
all you
comment
need
on
to
that,
do
you
is
can-
put some benches there and maybe a few picnic tables, and it would be fine.
Please wind up,
But no,
please.
you want to make it like the other park,
Your time is up.
where there's no place to sit and only a place to walk through.
Ms.
if you're
Renard, your
lucky.
time is up.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Andrea Roslinski, and the final speaker will be Kate Smith.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and council members. Well, I just have a couple comments. Do I have to come back for number 13 if I want
Yes,
to say
when
a
we get
short
to
thing?
number 13.
About what time will that be?
Should be pretty soon.
Okay. Well, I also want to say I think it's just a comment. I don't know if it's a county issue or a city issue, but I've been staying in Carpinteria. And there was one time on a Sunday when I missed the last bus, and then I tried to ride my bike all the way to Carpinteria. And I don't know, there's an area through Montecito and an area through Montecito, and right before you get to Carpinteria, it's totally dark. And I just don't know if I was going to ask maybe the Bryn School or the Projects of Sustainability, Adam Green's kids over there at City College, because maybe eventually, I know like some people don't want a lot of light in that area, but maybe if they did some kind of solar panels, it would be safer. Because, when you want to ride your bike, it was really dangerous to ride through that area without lights. And it might be a good idea to have like solar panels maybe on a motion detector for that area. And what else was I going to say? Well, I have a few comments about the library, about the green
So when we
area
get
and
to
some
that item, you
ideas.
can come back up.
So, yeah. Okay,
Thank you.
thanks for your time. Peace.
Thank you. Kate Smith?
Your Honor, Mayor Schneider,
You need to come up to the mic, please.
I cannot because there is a man here named Eric Friedman who has obtained restraining orders against me falsely.
Mr. Friedman is leaving the room for your public comment. If you'd like to come up to the podium for public comment, do it now. He just left the room, so you can come to the podium.
Okay, but I hope you understand. He was standing...
Ms. Smith, you need to come to the podium. And just, that's fine. You don't have to explain. We got it. So if you can, you have your 2 minutes. Go right ahead.
Hold on.
Ms. Rodriguez. Thank you.
But
Thank you.
Mayor Schneider, members of the Santa Barbara City Council, there is deep-seated and widespread school and government corruption in Santa Barbara County. There is collusion, conspiracy, and cover-up of wrongdoing by taxpayer-paid lawyers. And there is rampant and severe retaliation against whistleblowers. Please Google legal abuse syndrome. I am the nation's poster child, along with millions of other victims. Our nation is in psychosis, and our democracy is in peril. Both the school and the county obtained restraining orders against me so that I could not function, I could not speak truth to power, but truth will out, justice prevails, and love conquers all, in an eternal conflict against humorless arrogance, illusory prestige, brute force, and primeval stupidity. We have just witnessed a glorious revolution in Egypt, in Tunisia. It's spreading around the world. Santa Barbara is the perfect storm of injustice. My name is Katrina. Tomorrow I have a hearing against Michael Brown and the county's risk management, Ray Aromatorio, for fraud on the court. Please visit Fraud on the Court. They are calling for a congressional hearing about legal abuse and judicial misconduct. I am calling for a federal grand jury into the school-to-prison pipeline and into what has happened to our citizens in Santa Barbara. I am giving you the videotape of the hitting.
You need to wind up, please.
I'm submitting this to the entire council. Michael Brown hit me April 21st, 2009, at a Board of Supervisors meeting, and this is the videotape that was done by Michael White so that you could see the violation, and then please attend the hearing tomorrow, 1:30, Department 5.
Okay, thank you very
Colleen
much.
Stern presiding. Thank you.
That concludes public comment. We move on to the consent calendar. Are there any items to read, Ms. Rodriguez?
Item number 3, adoption of ordinance for a lease amendment with Santa Barbara Shellfish Company Incorporated. Recommendation that council adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the council of the city of Santa Barbara approving a lease amendment with Santa Barbara Shellfish Company Incorporated, allowing for a seasonal allocation of base rent effective March 17, 2011.
Thank you. Without further objection, we'll wait for the reading. Any motion or anyone want to pull anything off the consent calendar?
Move consent.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that passes. Thank you. Report from the Finance Committee, Mr. Francisco.
Yes, Madam Mayor, the Finance Committee met today and heard the mid-year financial report and recommended that the full council accept that report. We also were given an explanation of the various adjustments that are being made to the budget as a result of what we know now that we didn't know 6 months ago.
Great, thank you, and we'll have that further on the agenda. Item number 13.
Item number 13, Library Plaza Renovation Concept and Preliminary Design Services Contract, including recommendation C, that council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the council of the city of Santa Barbara approving and adopting the findings required by Health and Safety Code Section 33445 for the funding of capital improvements to the Library Plaza.
Thank you. Mr. Bossi.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and agency board members. My name is Brian Bossi, and I'm with the City of Santa Barbara's Housing and Redevelopment Division. The item before you today is the very first formal step in initiating a conceptual design for the proposed renovation of Library Plaza located on Anapamu Street. This is the first of many public meetings, but we will have many more to come, as this will be a very public process, noting that it's a very public space and means a lot to the community. First off, a little history regarding the request for proposal process that got us to today. The initial request for proposals was sent out on July 19th and was due August 9th. We had 8 submittals, and 4 of those teams were interviewed. While we were initiating this interview process, staff realized that we wanted to, it was our intention to cast a much broader net out to the recipients of this RFP, and we had promised the County Arts Commission as well as the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, who owns property next door, that we would send an RFP to them and they could then distribute it to their folks, noting their desire to include or have art as a component of this particular project. So with that in mind, instead of moving forward at that time, we canceled that first RFP process and we initiated a second request for proposal process. That process was that request for proposals was released September the 2nd and was due September the 16th and was due October the 2nd. And in an effort to be fair with the second process to all the teams, we allowed all 8 teams who had submitted for the first process the option of keeping their proposal in the queue, and we would just pick it up and it would automatically be submitted for the second process, or they could take that proposal back, tweak it if they wanted, and then come back and resubmit. And of course, the third option, if they didn't want to participate at all, they were more than welcome to take their proposal out of the process. With that second request for proposal process, we had 12 submittals. So we increased by 50%, and 5 design teams were interviewed. The proposed design team of Campbell & Campbell was selected by the interview panel as being the most qualified for this particular project. Their body of work includes numerous designs for public plazas, including the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Angels in Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Central Library, the Beverly Hills Civic Center, I believe the Pasadena Police Department as well as work on the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History. Campbell & Campbell is a family-owned design team who lives and works in Santa Barbara and also has an additional office in Santa Monica. One new recommendation you'll notice in this particular agenda report is the proposed loan of $2 million from the redevelopment agency to the city for repayment of expenses to be incurred by the city for the design and construction of the Library Plaza project. Now, the reason for this is the governor's proposal to eliminate redevelopment agencies. If that is approved, we do not want to get into the process of having the design complete for this project and no construction money. And when we came before the agency board May 5th of 2010 with our initial budget, as well as on June 29th with our final budget, this project was proposed as one of those to be included in our capital program. So the idea is this loan acts as an additional security against possible takings by the state. Now realize that it's a loan agreement, so we're not actually moving $2 million of RDA funds into a separate account. What we're here for today, the actual dollar figures are the $218,000 regarding this particular design proposal. So the $2 million, it's a loan agreement, and if this project moves forward, this is just for conceptual and preliminary design. We'd come back for final design. We'd come back for a construction contract if it were to continue to move forward. At any one of those points, your agency board has the ability to not go forward if they so choose, which would then take away that loan obligation because the project would essentially be abandoned. So that's just a little background. And with that introduction, I'd like to hand it over to Mark Aguilar, our redevelopment supervisor, to give you a little bit more detail on the proposed project itself.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council members. On the screen before you here, you see the proposed project area. It's essentially the library's front yard, the main grounds along East Anapamu Street between the library and the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. As you see to the north, we have the Granada Garage. To the south is La Arcada, the courthouse off to the east, and we think this is an opportunity to create a greater interaction and connection between all those locations. There are a number of goals for the project, including open, safe, and programmable space for public and library activities, such as weddings or book readings, those types of events that would serve the community. Reduction of maintenance, both landscape and hardscape. We think with our neighbor next door, the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, that this is a fantastic opportunity to include art or some type of artistic elements by working with them and having their input during the public design process. The proposed schedule would be 9 months. That includes participatory public workshops run by the firm of Campbell & Campbell. And to add a little bit more, the firm is comprised of Mrs. Regula Campbell, who is an architect, and Doug Campbell, who's a landscape architect and certified American Institute of Certified Planners certified. This shows the current costs, or the anticipated costs. The design contract would be for $159,280 with a change order allowance of 10%, bringing that subtotal to $175,208. Some additional costs for city staff survey work and supplies and design management add to that, giving it a subtotal for those services $43,000 and a total project design cost not to exceed $218,000. Staff originally came to council in May and then subsequently in June of last year with an estimate of $150,000. This exceeds that. And the construction cost that we included in the staff report or the loan for $2 million is also a staff estimate. Ultimately, the actual cost of construction would depend on the final design and what the low bid is at that time in the future. That's really the presentation on Library Plaza. We're available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. First questions, and then I see Library Board Member Eric Friedman here. Actually, Eric, do you want to speak or wait till after the questions? Wait till after the questions? Okay. Ms. Self and then Mr. White.
Thank you. Could these funds be used for the interior of the library that's needing renovation?
Madam Chair, Agency Board Member Self. That's a good question, and it's one that has been posed to us in the past. It could be. How that would need to happen would be the agency board would need to make the findings necessary to fund that project with redevelopment agency funds, meaning how it addresses blight and things of that nature. And we were having a little difficulty figuring that one out. It's an interior project, and so we could go back and analyze that, but in the end it would require the agency board to deem that part of the library is indeed considered blight and somehow helps to eliminate blight and the criteria that lead to blight.
Because we have had presentations about it needing carpeting and painting and that it is in not very good condition. So we just need to make that finding.
Madam Mayor, Agency Board Member House, it's a series of findings, blight being one of them.
Okay. I had asked you about how many staff hours had been used to date. Is the 80 to 100 staff hours that have been dedicated to the project so far, is that included in the $2 million or is that more?
Madam Chair, Agency Board Member Self. Again, we're not setting aside $2 million as part of today's action. That's a loan agreement for
right.
up to $2 million. This is for $218,000. And if you're asking if redevelopment agency staff time is included in this particular spreadsheet, it is not. Redevelopment agency staff does not call out individual projects, bill towards individual projects like planners and public works folks do. So we do not call out specific projects that, 1 hour here, 2 hours there, 1 hour here. That answers.
So that 100 hours times whatever the time is would be in addition to what is shown here. It wouldn't come out of the $2 million allocation. It's already been spent, and it's not
Part of your
counted
salary.
as job costing against this.
Madam Chair, Agency Board Member Self, that is correct. It does not count against this project.
That
and the
sounds
funds
like
available
another
for this project.
item to be discussed further later. Thank you.
Mr. White and then Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So you said that this cost, the 219,000 was $60,000, $70,000 more than you expected?
Madam Chair, Agency Board Member White, when we came to you last year, the estimate was $150,000 for design services. So at that point in time, not knowing the exact extent, or what would need to be done at Library Plaza and how big exactly the area we wanted to look at, $150,000 was our best guess, and that was based on a rough estimate as well of anywhere from $1.25 to $1.5 million for construction. So we extrapolated it from that. Both, again, estimates. As we began to work into this particular project, met with the various departments and staff that have to have a say with this particular proposed project, it became very apparent that it was a little bit bigger than we had anticipated, but at the same time, a good idea to include these additional parts and cover a wider area. So it is $68,000 more, but we feel it encompasses the true project of what needs to be done out there. And again, our staff time is not counted against that. The staff time you see up there for design management and engineering services, primarily public works staff, who will be working on this from the engineering side.
Well as Campbell and Campbell, right. Okay, and then, Madam Mayor, I had actually alerted staff, as like Ms. Self, I'm getting calls and emails about the library, about all this, the money that's being invested, proposed to be invested here, and how that dovetails with the interior work. And I had asked that we get some kind of refresher on where that interior work stands at this point. I don't know when in this session we do that, but I would ask that we get a little summary of that somewhere along the line. Thank you.
Are you talking about the basement remodel and the children's?
Exactly right.
Do you want to just answer that question at this point, Ms. Macias?
We have Irene Macias here to answer that question.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Agency Board Member White. We do have a current project to move the current children's area at the Central Library to the lower level of the library. This plan has been in the works for some time, and when faced with budget reductions, we made the decision to move the collections that were on that level up to the main floor, anticipating that the project would happen sooner. So, as you know, that area has been vacant for some time. But we have moved forward with the project. We have hired an architect, LPA, from Orange County. They've done lots of libraries in the past. So we're actually currently looking at floor plans and design elements. We are hoping to have a preliminary design finalized sometime in the late spring. And then we're actually working on a specific timeline that would take us through final design and through construction, which we're thinking will probably not happen for a year or more. Yes.
But it would happen in about a year that construction would begin?
Yes.
And is the funding in place for that? Where is the funding for that?
We have funding from a bequest that was left to the library several years ago, Fenton Davison Trust. We only have about $1 million in that account, so that would allow us to do something very basic. We're really hoping that our fundraising campaign will generate more monies that will allow us to do something more elegant and more exciting for kids.
Thank you.
Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I got a new guy question for the RDA staff. Is it typical that an RDA project involves general staff on the outside and expense of general staff when developing a project? There's a kind of a follow-up on Ms. Self's question.
Madam Chair, agency board member, outside staff or inside staff? I'm sorry, could you?
Oh, I'm talking about city staff working RDA projects, so not contained within the budget itself. Is that basically how we normally do those types of projects?
Madam Chair, agency board member Rouse, this is very typical of redevelopment agency projects. There is staff time both from internal city staff, meaning public works, who do a lot of the project management, especially when it gets to a construction phase, inspectors and things of that nature, as well as in the design phase with engineering to make sure that what is being proposed is being engineered appropriately. And also going outside for design services. We do not have those types of services available within the city itself.
Thank you. And my next question would be, will there be a specific design proposed, or will there be a menu of choices to triage from in terms of what we can do, what we can't do, having some choices whether or not something costs X or X plus, a certain factor?
Madam Chair, agency board member Rouse, what I anticipate is a series of public meetings run by Campbell & Campbell and staffed with city staff and agency staff, where we will go out, meet with stakeholders, the museum, neighbors, general public, Arts and Letters Cafe, folks who are right in the vicinity who see what happens and goes on there every day and may have an idea of what could be a nice addition to a project. So we go through a series of public meetings, kind of get the idea of what folks are wanting, as well as park staff, library staff, and public works staff regarding the issues they have with maintenance and things with the plaza. And from there, a design will be put together, and it'll go through a number of iterations before it even goes before the HLC. We obviously get comments from the HLC. That'll be paired with what the public's opinion was, what the public's idea was regarding the plaza, and it's a very open and public process where all these ideas kind of mesh together and a design idea is put forward. And at that, once we move through that, especially at the end of the preliminary stage, there will be a cost estimate put together. And that'll be monitored as we go through the project as well.
And then I would assume that the design of the Campbell & Campbell time is included in those public outreach meetings. Is that?
Member Ross, that is correct. That is the 159,000 you saw at the top of that chart. That includes all of their work.
Okay, thank you. That I don't see any more lights on for questions, so we'll move to public comment and bring up Library Board Member Eric Friedman first, and be followed by Andrea Roslinski.
Good afternoon, Mayor Schneider and fellow agency board members. My name is Eric Friedman, and I'm the chair of the city's Library Advisory Committee meeting. And I just want to clarify that our board hasn't been able to meet in regards to this specific proposal before you today, but we have in the past discussed the plaza renovations and have been generally supportive of those. We feel they're necessary for the long-term viability and new role of the library. I'm also aware of concerns from the community that have arisen from this in regards to timing, cost, and purpose of this project. And I just want to say that the concerns that have been expressed are valid and deserve to be taken seriously. Those are issues that we've discussed in previous library board meetings. And if this project was simply, as has been expressed in a number of venues, that it was specifically a project to remove the homeless from the area, it would be a ludicrous project for $2 million. But that's not the goal of this project, and there are other means that the city is working on to address homelessness. But the purpose of this project, again, is it's revitalizing the area. Now, if you consider Anna Pamu Street, you have the Art History Museum on one side of the library, and then you have the county courthouse, which are two great buildings that draw a lot of visitors down there. And then you have the library, which is in the middle, which does need some revitalization. In the long-term approach to the library, especially now that we're having the downstairs children's library, that's a project we've been looking forward to and getting updates from on the board. A lot of concerns from the community have been expressed that parents and others don't feel safe coming into the library. So this is an opportunity that we have before us today to address concerns of parents and others who are accessing the library. And specifically, the plaza renovation would open up views in that corridor, which would go a long way to tempering a lot of illicit activity. If you're walking along Anna Pamu Street, you can see that there are a lot of nooks and crannies where people can hide, which only contributes to excessive illicit activity there. So just by eliminating those and creating a flat area, which is the proposal, and again, it could change based on public comment, that would go a long way toward addressing some issues. It also would make it more inviting to the public to have a big open area that would perhaps have library and literacy fairs, art fairs, and would really contribute to the overall vitality of the area. And then again, it is planning ahead for the future of the library with the children's library downstairs. And then finally, I'd just like to say that the future, that libraries are changing along with the technology in the 21st century. So libraries have a new role. They're not just bricks and mortars for books and encyclopedias anymore. They're really community gathering places. And this would go a long way towards fulfilling that role of being a community gathering place and making the Anapamu Street a place of civic and community pride and engagement. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. Andrea Roslinski will be followed by Greg Sharp.
Hi again. Well, I think this project seems to be just a bit overpriced because we have so many creative people in the community. So why not? Well, and why not collaborate with, with people like Art from Scrap, and we could decorate the plaza with wind chimes made of driftwoods, shells, beads, and old keys. Maybe bells. Well, but, a lot of these ideas are good, but what I'm thinking is, we can collaborate, maybe even do, some food there, maybe strawberries, tomatoes, easy things. And what upsets me is, when we call people homeless, it makes them feel less than. We can call people in transition. But, I know there's a need to make a change there, but maybe sometime, if we did, something where we can include some of the people in transition, then you can see a different side of those people. We can wean out which people are creative and which people are, making problems. But back to here, let me see. We could, and let's see. What else? Right? And maybe we could invite people in transition to donate their time to make sculptures, to beautify and add cultural also, cultural, like themes, like if it's fiesta, maybe we can ask artists to come that, do things Spanish, or maybe if there's different, for the summer solstice, we can always have different themes up. And also, I was thinking we can use the space maybe once a month for like a community art show, where even people homeless or people in transition can show some of their art, some of their poetry, or ceramics, pottery.
You need to wind up,
give
please.
a percentage, like to the people that are making the things, and a percentage back to the city for the city budget. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Greg Sharp will be followed by Jeremy Tesmer.
Afternoon. I just have a couple questions. If the RDA money is taken away by the state, and I heard you talk about a loan, then taxpayers would be on the hook. Is that correct? Well, then taxpayers are on the hook anyway with RDA money. Whether.
Well, why don't you ask your questions, and when we're done with public comment, we'll make sure we get them answered.
The first question is where did this idea, where did the RFP come from? The original RFP. What prompted it? Okay. The next question is, how is this going to be funded? Is it going to be through RDA money? And is it being funded through the RDA money because it's spend it now or perhaps lose it? And lastly, is there the idea, reading from the sound, I don't know how credible that is, but the idea that this would be able to facilitate programs and different things going on in the plaza area. Why can't those programs be brought forward, and let's see whether those things work, whether they're viable, before we go out and spend $2 million on something that, in terms of, you talked about blight. I don't think this looks like blight. I think it's a beautiful place. It just needs to be maintained. It needs to be watched over, and it can be used for all the activities people are talking about now. I don't think we need to spend $2 million on it. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll get your questions answered after public comment. Jeremy Tessmer be followed by Ginny Brush.
Mayor Schneider, members of the council, thank you for having me this afternoon. I'm here on behalf of Sullivan Goss and the Arts and Letters Cafe. We are the nearest neighbor to the plaza, and I've worked for Frank for 9 years now. So I've been coming to work 5-6 days a week for 9 years. So when you listen to other people, I hope you will take into account I am the closest thing to an eyewitness that I've heard here today. I don't think this is a homeless issue. I think this is a criminality issue. And so I would look at it not as blight in terms of broken windows. I would say we have people that the police have told us are pedophiles, rapists. I've seen drug paraphernalia out there. I've seen people who are engaging with underage kids for who knows what. We've had 4 separate attacks inside the gallery by residents of that plaza since 2006. And this is the taste of our city. This is next to the Granada. This is next to La Arcada, the courthouse. This is the part where all of our resources in the city direct people to go to the center of the city and branch out. And this is what they see. They see a park full of places where women can be raped, where people can do drugs, and that's what goes on. The nearest example of something successful is El Jardín de las Granadas. Women have lunch there every day. When I go to the Coffee Cat, I see people sitting out there. I don't see any kind of illegal activity. It's a successful redevelopment project. So when you're thinking about this, don't think of it as a homelessness issue. Please, please, please think of it as a public safety issue. It will impact our business in a positive way, but it will also impact the library in a positive way, the people at La Arcada, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ginny Brush will be followed by Steve Cushman, and the final speaker will be Kellum DeForest.
Mayor Schneider and members of the agency board, I just want to sort of follow up also on Jeremy's comments. This, to me, I see as a safety issue. I spend a lot of my time right in the heart of the Cultural Arts District, and as Jeremy suggested, this is when you come out of the New Granada Garage parking lot and you're visiting the city. When you exit towards the museum, this is the first thing that you see. I'm concerned as a safety issue. This is a place where school kids come down to go to the museum for the first time or go to events at the Granada. And it's not a place, as a past school teacher, that I would feel safe about leaving my students there or having them all meet there before they could go on to a cultural event. So I think it's very important, and I think there are significant safety issues in that area, particularly after dark. So I think those need to be addressed. I think given what might potentially happen with redevelopment agency funds, I think it would be prudent to move forward with this project that I think makes a lot of sense, and I would have to also point to the Jardín de las Granadas as an example of what can be done when you take the time to consult with key stakeholders and come up with something that works for people that know the area and for the purpose for which it's intended. I think to have that event, if you think about First Thursday and the kinds of things that are now happening, this would be another one of those events. Right now, if you've been there recently, VADA students have put informal place up there for the exhibition of their artwork. But this is a great opportunity as you look to the library moving forward. It's going to be its front yard, and it's an opportunity for the public to have the benefit of access to arts and cultural events in a safe and pleasant atmosphere. Thank you.
Steve Cushman and then Kellum DeForest.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Steve Cushman, I'm president of the Chamber of Commerce, and I was for 9 years president of the downtown organization, and I've worked on this this park for quite a long time. I think the first issue is public safety, but honestly, the best use of the $2 million, if you could do it, would be to keep the library open. And I'm sorry you can't do it. But I think the second best use of the money is to improve that park so that it's a safe place for families and people who are visiting the library to go. Now, congratulations for picking Campbell & Campbell. Great firm, local firm. Really love to see that. They did the Library Plaza at the LA Public Library, and that was done, it's called Spine. It was done with two local artists, Harry Reese and Judd Fine, and it is a world-class piece of art and a world-class and a draw for people from around the world to the public library. So go see that if you haven't seen it. Campbell and Campbell did that. That's really phenomenal. Now, because I've done this so long, about 20 years ago, when Hugh Peterson was alive, we looked at this whole project, and we didn't consider just the upper part of the Library Plaza, because if you go down to where, I think, is that where the entrance to the children's library is going to be? Down below?
Non-public area.
Yeah. So if you look at the lower section, which is all cement, we looked at that too, and we said, well, that's part of the Library Plaza, and why couldn't we make use of that? We put together a plan. Hugh was ready to donate. Was a pretty significant donation. Hugh was going to purchase a fountain. Well, not a fountain. He did the fountain on the upper area. He was going to purchase a waterfall that would run the length of that retaining wall and would be the entrance to the lower plaza. He was also going to purchase a copy of The Thinker. It was about $10 million, and insert it in the niche of the library. And he was going to purchase a huge Calder sculpture to put on the lawn. Now, unfortunately, we couldn't come to agreement with the librarian at that time as to how this would all work. But you might remember that, and you might go talk to Hugh's widow, Marge. It might be an interesting memorial to her. Thank you.
Thank you. Callum DeForest will be the final speaker.
Good afternoon, Callum DeForest. I think this is a very important use of funds this time that have to be used for something else much better than moving benches around on down on State Street. Has there been a historic structures report prepared? It would be interesting to know the history, because I can remember the history when the main entrance to the library was through those big doors, or they weren't actually through, they were small doors inside the big doors, and it circulated, so you didn't have to run this gauntlet now between the street and the entrance to both the library and the Faulkner Gallery. And then the circulation needs to be considered, as that has just been mentioned, all the way down to La Arcada Plaza and the back entrance to the Art Museum. Thank you.
Thank you. That closes the public. It's to the council. Actually, staff, there were some questions that were asked. If you could comment on those, that would be great.
Madam Chair, I'd be happy to. The first one regarding the origination of the idea for the request for proposals. The origination for the idea, as I believe Ms. Macias stated, was they've been looking into this for quite some time. As far as the redevelopment agency is concerned, I believe it was brought forward as a possible project in fiscal year the planning for fiscal year 2010, and was not funded at this time, at that particular time. So in the next round, fiscal year 2011, it was presented to the agency board and approved to be put into the capital program, just the design services portion of it.
And I might add, Madam Mayor, members of the council, that the businesses in that area, especially Sullivan Goss, have been advocating that we do something in this area for several years.
Thank you. There's also a question about the loan and if something should happen and the governor takes the money, are the taxpayers up for the loan? And if you could comment on that.
Correct. Madam Chair, as I stated in my presentation, the loan is something new that you haven't seen before on redevelopment agency projects, and the thinking behind that is that the governor's proposal could go through in some way, shape, or form. We're not exactly sure how that's going to work. They don't have the details out yet. All that we know is they're proposing the elimination. How that's going to work, we don't know. So what you've seen is a lot of agencies immediately after it was released going into emergency session and getting into agreements and things like that. With this particular item, this loan, we feel will be an additional security for possible future funding for the project. So as tax increment comes in over the years, as we move, if this project is decided to move forward, as we go forward and eventually get to a construction, those funds, there would be a loan in place, and the funds would then be transferred over via public hearing in front of your board. So it is a security measure against possible options being discussed by the governor at this time.
The historical report Mr. DeForest was asking about.
Sure. The historical report, that would be, if we are required to do one of those, that would come when we visit the Historic Landmarks Commission, and if they direct us to do that, we would do that, and that would either be internally with our city historian or possibly externally.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Hotchkiss.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So in essence, we're just saying we're trying to double protect ourselves so that we don't get the rug pulled out from under us by the state.
Madam Chair, Agency Board Member Hotchkiss, that's correct. We do feel that a lot of what these redevelopment agencies have done over the past month with these emergency sessions, we do feel that we have already done that back in 2003. At the end of 2003, the agency, that was the last time the agency could issue debt. So we already had two debt service items that we had to pay off until 2019. We included a long-term agreement between the agency and the city that basically established all the rest of that tax increment coming from that point forward would be paid back to the city for projects and programs initiated by the Redevelopment Agency Board. So we do feel we already have that initial security that everybody's scrambling to get right now. We feel that we've done that almost 8 years ago, and we are confident with that. This is just an added measure of security to address the governor's proposal.
Great, thank you. I've got a smattering of questions. I'm not sure who wants to address them, but on the timeline, we said we've got 9 months of outreach, listening to folks. Then I assume Campbell & Campbell will go and do their design for X number of months and bring it back. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Agency Board Member Hotchkiss, those will happen concurrently. It's not 9 months of public outreach and then start the design. We'll be doing outreach, do some initial meetings with the public, get some ideas, again, meet with city staff responsible for maintaining and operating the area, put some Campbell & Campbell will put some designs together. So it all happens dynamically as we move forward.
Okay, so
that
9 months or 10 months, we ought to see something.
We'd get to, our idea is to finish conceptual and preliminary design within that 9 months.
In the activities that you're thinking there, could food service of some sort be part of it? Cafe, whatever?
Madam Chair.
Maybe that's asking too careful a question right now.
No, but I think that's one of the ideas that has come up, possibly some sort of removable kiosk, a coffee type deal that you see at a lot of other libraries and things like that. It is something that would be looked at to increase the vitality of the area.
And one thing that Kellen brought up, those are magnificent main doors. Is it possible to redo the circulation of the library so we actually use those, or is that not part of this plan, or have we not thought about that yet?
Madam Chair, Board Member Hotchkiss, that was considering, we discussed that with library staff. The configuration of the library behind those doors really kind of prevents us from making that the new entrance. But as there have been discussions that in part of this design along that Anna frontage, that perhaps we open that up a little bit more to expose those and maybe, touch them up a little bit to make them stand
they're
out
pretty
there.
fabulous. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Mr. House?
First, a question for Ms. Macias. Reaching back a little bit into the genesis of this project, and perhaps you could refresh our memory as to when the conversation about improvements in this area began, and what what kinds of things people have been saying, and when did this really get some sort of legs on it? How long ago has that been?
Madam Chair, Agency Board Member House, I've been with the library almost 14 years, and I remember one of the first things that the previous director, Carol Cater, talked to me about was a desire to make some sort of improvements in that area. I'm not sure how she followed up with that, but when I became the director, that was one of the things that I set as kind of a priority. And it was partially from the feedback that we were getting from the local merchants, particularly Mr. Goss, but over at the Coffee Cat, and from complaints that I have gotten through the years from the public who are concerned about, some people had told me that they no longer come to the library because of sometimes being accosted on the front area. So I've had many requests through the years to do something about that area. But and there are the security concerns that have been brought up. We work very closely with the police department, but part of their desire is to improve security by having a more visible space. So we've had many talks with them and meetings. And again, the desire to have an area that we could have activities, have library programs. So we've been talking about that through the years. And also, since Parks and Recreation has had a lessened budget, they used to come in and maintain the grounds 5 days a week. I think they come 2 or 3 days now. So they aren't able to maintain it in the way that it had been maintained.
So an easier to maintain, more open space, amenable to public activities, that kind of thing. And I was going to ask you, so your vision then for this, once it's done, from a library's perspective, from the operations and programs of the library, how would you summarize that?
We actually do sometimes have programs out there. It's just a very difficult space to do programming because it's cut into different levels and different spaces, so it's hard to take advantage of that place. But I think Steve Cushman or Ginny Brush mentioned the VADA program from Santa Barbara High School. We are partnering with them to allow them to have displays on First Thursday, but it's not the best space for them to display their art. So we're really looking at kind of bringing the library out to that space and to make it available for rental opportarities too.
I see. Now, so an outdoor room for the, or rooms for the library, and then an opportunity to generate some revenue as well. All right. Well, thank you. And I guess for staff, this idea about public safety, and I'm reading here, it looks like the Health and Safety Code, Section 33445, is necessary to make some findings in that area in order to program funds. Would you just take a minute and talk to us about that? There's a little bit in the staff report about it, but there's an encouragement of pedestrian activity by locals and tourists in the immediate area through improved public safety and aesthetic design. Is that a core part of this project?
Madam Chair, Agency Board Member House, yes, it very much is. And that's these findings are required by state law, and it's something we come to the agency board with any time we begin to spend money on a proposed project in our capital program. And a big part of redevelopment and redevelopment funding is used to improve safety. That is one of the conditions in and around what you consider blight. So improve pedestrian safety, improve access to the site, and open it up for the public. So yes, these are all things that are goals of the project.
All right, great. Thank you. I have just two more things. One is, I think you may have answered it with Mr. Hotchkiss, but this is a further documentation of an existing agreement between the city and the redevelopment agency. We already have an agreement with regards to this kinds of funds to be used for this kind of this. In fact, this project was called out in the original agreement.
Madam Chair, Agency Board Member House, this is in addition to an agreement we already have, yes, between the redevelopment agency and the city. So this is just another layer trying to secure these funds depending on what the state budget comes down with as far as redevelopment agency funds.
Okay, good. Then the last question I have, and this goes to the process in the RFP process. I know that it went through 2 rounds, and after the first round, it became apparent that there were other, we say, stakeholders or other parties that had been promised to be included in the list and be given an opportunity to get the word out. And so you went around for a second time. And so all those who had participated in the first round had been invited to participate in the second one, right? Or describe that process to me a little bit so we understand how that worked out.
Madam Chair, Agency Board Member House, that's exactly correct. We always pride ourselves in being very open to the public and going as far as we possibly can with our outreach, especially with projects that are going to be this public in nature. We want the best, and we want to make sure that the public gets the most bang for their dollars. So in this particular case, we went out with the first RFP. We received 8 submittals. 4 of those folks were interviewed. We realized, and we made a mistake, and we'll cop to that. We made a mistake. We did not get that out to the folks that we said we would, and that in particular was the County Arts Commission, the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. We had promised them a copy of the RFP so they could put it out to a whole different level of people that we usually don't have access to, different types of artists, design teams, and things like that. So we thought that would be very important to do, especially noting the location. So we cut the first round off, started a new RFP process. And those 8 folks who submitted were we told them that they could participate again, and we would keep their submittals on file if they wanted to, and they wouldn't have to do any more work, or they could.
They were all confidential, right? In other words, that information had not become public.
That information was not made public. That information is still not public. It's confidential in nature, and until the legislative body, in this case the agency board, approves this contract, then those would be available for public.
Okay.
Review.
So then it went to the second round.
So it went to the second round. We received 12 submittals. So again, additional outreach did help. We got 12 submittals instead of 8. 5 of those folks were interviewed. So we were successful in the sense that we went further. We went back and got more responses. It isn't something we'd like to mimic in the future. We'd like to get it right the first time, and I think we will from now on.
Well, my question goes to this. Is the redevelopment agency required to accept or to favorably consider, I guess, the lowest responsive bidder? I mean, how does that work in a bidding environment like this?
Madam Chair, Agency Board Member House, as far as professional services are concerned, especially regarding design, the law does not state that you have to choose the lowest bidder. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, you're not even supposed to consider dollars and cents of these proposals. You're supposed to consider them on the merits of what you've put out for the RFP and what was submitted. And so that's the process we undertook. When it comes down to a public works contract, a construction contract, then yes, you are required to take the lowest bidder. But in this particular case, you're not.
Yeah, I appreciate that clarification. So then this is the bottom line on this whole little line of questioning. Sorry, Madam Mayor, I just want to make sure I get down to this part. So you know how beautiful that the little Park Jardín de Granadas across the street turned out. It was my understanding that that was one of those who submitted, the firm that did that submitted for this as well. And I know that some of the businesses in that area were very hopeful that a quality design similar to that could actually come about. I mean, they're very hopeful for that. You heard one of them here today. So when we get to a point like this, on what do we as a board really make our decision? I mean, you haven't given us information that helps us compare the different proposals. We're really relying on staff for having done that. So what can you say to us that would help us understand why we wouldn't have selected the same contract or same consulting firm that had done such a good job across the street? Where do we stand in that as a decision-making body in trying to make a determination right now? I mean, the dollars and cents aside, because I understand that other proposal may have been considerably lower than this one. So what do we do?
Madam Chair, Agency Board Member House, this is a process that we follow. The RFP process is a standard process with the city that we follow. The group that interviewed the folks was comprised of city staff, upper-level supervisors and managers who are familiar with these types of projects, who understand the needs of the surrounding neighbors. Also included in that RFP was the reference to across the street, the idea that that is a wonderful public space. It has worked well, and if possible, design themes and elements should be carried across, because you really can make it almost one cohesive plaza, minus the street running through it, but you can get that feel. So as far as your decision making, you know, we were tasked with putting together an RFP, putting that out, and the group that interviewed these folks chose who they felt unanimously actually was the best design team for this particular project, and that is what we bring forward to you today. for
Anything
consideration.
particularly you want to say about that so that we know what it was that really made it stand out?
I'll defer to Mr. Aguilar, who was actually involved in the interview processes.
Great, thank you.
Madam Chair, Board Member House, it's difficult to say. The panel interviewed 5 of the 12 respondents, and they were all very different. And they all came forward with different proposals. Some focused more on just landscaping elements. Some focused more on maybe business elements. Some focused more on maybe just art elements. And so it was a combination of the panel reviewing the actual written documents, the proposals submitted, as well as their responses to and their presentation during the interview part. So it wasn't one specific thing. It's just not possible. I contacted all of the folks who were not selected following those interviews and explained to them a summary of what the panel seemed to view as maybe their Achilles heel or where they could have been stronger. And they generally seemed receptive and thankful for that information.
Okay, thank you, sir. And so it was a unanimous decision of the panel?
Actually, Madam Chair, Board Member House, to clarify, it was a numerical ranking, and as well as some discussion. And it wasn't exactly, if you had to call it unanimous, it wasn't exactly unanimous, but generally almost. There was a dissenting point in there.
Is that like horseshoes or something, generally?
Yes, Madam
Okay.
Chair.
It's a strong recommendation to the board.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much.
Ms. Self.
Thank you. That the main issue here that I'm hearing is a lack of enforcement for bad behavior. And I was wondering if you had considered security cameras. MTD has installed new security camera system very successfully.
Madam Chair, Agency Board Member Self, again, we're at the very initial start of this design review process. That can be, if that's something you want us to look into as part of this overall concept, we can do that. But again, we are at the very start where we're just going to start going out and meeting with people and talking about what the ideas are for that particular plaza.
We're putting, just to be clear, the loan for the other piece up to $2 million as a maximum, to give ourselves full flexibility of what we might want to see. It's possible after all these conversations we'll find something that will cost significantly less, but it certainly can't cost more because that's the ceiling. So really that just depends on what we hear from the community. If they just say spruce up what's there, put cameras in, do something else, that could be it, and it could be significantly less, or there might be some other elements to it that could relate more to activities at the library that would cost more. So that's how I'm understanding the other piece of the budget to here. It's not a floor but a ceiling, and we might not even come close to that. It all depends on the public feedback that we're going to get. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, that is exactly correct. It is not our intention to design to a $2 million project. That is a high estimate. We consider it more to be between the $1 and $1.5 million construction cost, everything included in that construction, but we will not be, Kemmel & Kemmel will not be designing to a $2 million project. A lot of what will be out there is going to be in response to the folks who operate and maintain that, as well as the public and the neighbors as well. So it's going to be a combination of things that then will be put together in a cohesive design and costed out.
Thank you. Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate the one gentleman that came in and spoke today because he's probably more reflective of a lot of the letters that we've gotten so far about this project. The public understanding of what we're doing here isn't well reflected in the media. And I know we're going to do the public outreach, and I know we're going to meet with the stakeholders. But part of me wonders if it wouldn't be constructive at this point in time to really kind of describe in a more broad public way, maybe even in the form of an editorial piece on what it is we're actually trying to do here, because I think it looks cryptic, it looks unilateral, and then the public is clearly upset with the way we as generally as government handles money. So I completely understand that perspective. Certainly is what I felt myself more before I became in office. But I think that that especially with the RDA funds, because they are so much in the media right now, and there is so much give and take about what may happen and what may not happen. I wonder if some kind of a coordinated effort on our part wouldn't be wise to really bring people into the fold, and maybe save us a little bit of time and trouble in these projects going forward.
I don't see any lights on. Mr. White.
So we're to comment, right?
Yeah, we're
there.
Wherever we want to go.
Okay. Well, I think that the public perception at this point of this project is, as Mr. Rouse is describing, that how could we be spending, and Mr. Cushman brought it up, and I am sort of bringing it up in the form of the questions I was asking about the remodeling of the basement. Here we are spending $2 million on the library to make a plaza, and it's closed on Mondays, and it's the remodeling of the basement is going more slowly than people might have hoped. So, and again, we who are participating in this understand that anomaly. The RDA money is available for certain tasks and not available for others, and clearly the safety issue. Any of us who use the library see that safety issue, and see the there's sort of a dog-earedness about what is this? Was that 70s development in there? Was that when that quote unquote modernization occurred there? Was it 60? Okay, so it
for the
definitely
public,
feels, the library was renovated in the late 70s. And it definitely, I mean, what we had was this classic, and Mr. Hotchkiss brought up the doors. I mean, we had this classic, probably 20s building, which is one of our landmarks, and it got a lot of wonderful work to it, and it ended up with something that in that era people could sit, where there was a place where people could sit and fit a vision, and now it's a place where unfortunate things are happening, and it's not it's taking away from a wonderful cultural flowering that's happening in that area, particularly with the Granada back up and running. A huge investment by not only the city but by our community. So. Here is a next piece as far as the exterior goes. I've seen this city or this board invest money in interior work. We've seen it at the fire department. We've seen it at the police department. Perhaps not successfully at this point, but at least the exploration's been going on there. So I do see that there is a way to get to some interior funding that could occur. So I'm very much one to be looking at that interior. I mean, let's get our kids reading. And of course, keeping the library open on Monday, I'm going to be looking at that when we start going into the negotiations with our employees. I'm just desperate to see our libraries open as much as they can be. So I get the public concern, and I also get that this is a reasonable task with which can move forward. And I like the idea of the double use, the wedding notion. Is there a potential for a little catering kitchen there or something there? I mean, just making double use of these spaces has some merit. So I'm looking forward to this thing coming through as a quality but lean and mean project, and I will be supporting it today.
Mr. Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Since there have been a lot of questions about this, I just wanted to say a few things about redevelopment agency funds and how they're spent, where they're spent. We have a redevelopment district in this city. We can spend the money, which is property tax money that is set aside legally for this purpose, we can spend the money, generally speaking, within the district, and it's on capital projects. 20% of it goes to affordable housing. The remaining 80% goes to various capital improvements. And over the years, the city has spent money on such things as State Street sidewalks a few times, Paseo Nuevo, and other projects that, on balance, have been big economic winners for the city. The library, of course, is an important historic building, and as a few people have pointed out, it's also at the center of a very important part of our city for both commerce and tourism. So again, when we put money into these projects, we're not simply looking for places to spend money that we have to spend. We're looking for places where, when we make those improvements, we as a city are going to get something back in terms of improved sales tax or other improved revenue streams, or in this case, another very, very important public purpose going back really to the founding of this country, and something that distinguishes us still today from almost every country in the world, is the concept of the free public library and the contribution that free public libraries make to the education of the people. It's important that the library, as many other people have pointed out, be a safe and welcoming environment. And it's also important that a building of that importance to the city, both architecturally and socially, be maintained. As Mr. Bossi pointed out, the last major work on the exterior of the library happened almost 30 years ago. And these kinds of public institutional buildings require regular maintenance and improvement. They get very, very heavy use, and the purposes of these buildings change over time, and we have to adapt to that. And if we want our downtown to continue to be an inviting place and a place that the people of this city, the taxpayers of this city, can actually use and enjoy, we have to spend the money on it. I guarantee you that if this project is done right, it will more than return the money that we put into it. So, again, important to remember that these redevelopment agency funds have to be spent on projects of these types. That's state law. We have absolutely no choice in that matter. And fortunately, we have the money to spend on a project like this. And this project exactly fits the definition of what redevelopment agency projects should be. The redevelopment agency's purpose is to get rid of blight and to improve economic vitality and cultural vitality. So those are the purposes behind this project, and this is exactly the sort of thing I believe that we should be doing with the funds that we have remaining in the RDA budget.
Ms. Self?
Thank you. We've gotten a lot of emails about this, and I think it's RDA money, no matter how you look at it, is the people's money. And we're here to represent the people and what they want done with their money. We're not here just for our own self-gratification. I think revitalizing that area, you could go a long way with some maintenance. And when I hear people saying it's dated, what is the difference between dated and historic? Had it not been updated previously, it would have a more historical appeal to it, I'm imagining. I haven't seen it, so I don't know. It might have been just a box with windows. But I talked to some people in our tree committee. We were here not a week ago and discussing the removal of a tree. Have you been through that plaza and seen the flowering trees? Along the side on Anapamu, the beautiful big camellia bushes. And I understand, as Mayor has said, this project could morph. But most projects we've seen get legs, and they become much larger in scope than what we intended. I also have problem with, say, putting something like a coffee kiosk in a public space to rent out and make revenue. How would that affect the nearby Coffee Cat? I think we need to consider those sort of things when we make decisions up here. And I think Mr. Cushman's idea of maybe making this a memorial where we get private donations to do something, but still have the same outreach. But I don't think that this needs a total meltdown and repour. The primary reason for me is the money. And we have seen that maybe we're going to have to revisit this one again in a week or two also. But the common thread throughout our nation is we're spending too much money. And I, for one, I don't like this idea because, as Mr. Francisco has brought up, we have used these funds to improve the area, but our state is broke. And if this money goes back from development agencies so we can get our state house in order, okay, we could have a discussion about that. And I'm not commenting to that. It's just you need to sometimes look at the big picture. And something, I had another question here. When the wages are going to be considered staff paid out of this money, does that include what the city considers overhead costs for those staff? Because we have here where a city planner making $76 an hour with benefits and so on. By the time you get to the overhead, it's $206.87 an hour for a city planner. Are you using the full total amount, or are you just using a salary or a salary benefit amount?
Madam Chair and board member, my understanding is that it would be the full amount, and I know you're just putting that out as an example, but we wouldn't be using a planner at this point. It's primarily engineering staff, engineers, as well as inspectors to work on this particular project.
They're not much less, but thank you.
Mr. House?
Well, thank you very much, and I want to thank everyone who's been involved in this all the way up to this point, including those who put their names in the ring for the in the hat, so to speak, for this project. Campbell and Campbell for their work in accomplishing the support of the review team. This isn't the right place for it. I wonder about the decision-making process, but then again, what we've really done is we've empowered a group of people to make their best determination and look at all those multiple factors, as Mr. Aguilar says, that go into these kinds of proposals, and try to make their best determination as to who's the right one for the job. And we certainly do have a good model across the street, and I'm hopeful that the public's comments and their investment of their ideas is going to really reflect that, and we're going to get something that articulates beautifully across the street, goes around the side down to La Arcata, and all the way around the other side in terms of landscaping and improvements near the bus stop on Anacapa. I mean, it's really got a chance now to make a beautiful, just really bring this thing into fruition and have it be as great as it can be. So I enthusiastically support this project, and I think that there could be this is the kind of project for which a redevelopment agency has particularly been designed. It will uplift the area. It will support the businesses in the area in doing better, which definitely helps on the other end in terms of the tax revenues that come towards the city. But all those things move around in a circle. Hopefully contractors will get selected, that some of them will be from the local area, and the money will go back around into the economy as well. So these have so many different positive impacts on the community, and I really appreciate this kind of project. It's been a long time coming. So I'll just shortcut the rest of my comments and say I move that we accept the staff recommendation A, B, C, and D, including the resolution that we have in our staff report.
There a second?
Second.
Okay, I have some comments and then a couple more lights. Thank you for the presentation. You know, I think we all got some emails and about this, mainly I think due to some misunderstanding or just not having the information in front of them about what this money is and what it can be used for. And I don't blame them because they don't live, breathe, work city stuff every day. They just see a headline saying $2 million spent on plaza renovations. And why in the world would they think that that couldn't be used to keep the library open on Mondays? So I understand that kind of instant reaction. I think that's what Mr. Rouse was alluding to a little earlier. So I think, you know, to be clear that it can't be used, unfortunately, to keep the libraries open on Monday, and that's going to be a budget decision that we need to look at and as part of the budget process, as Mr. White also said. But it does, I think, give us a lesson learned in terms of when these items come to us, and there'll be other redevelopment agency proposals and whatnot that come to us to look at and to start initiating the process and so forth. We really need to do a better job up front and in terms of alert about what the issue is, where to go for more information, what redevelopment funds are used for. Even though we know, because we live and breathe it every day, but it's really not, we need to tell the public and make sure that they have full information so that they can, understand best what it is. So, and then give us an opinion whether or not we really should use redevelopment agency money in the way it's designed to be used for this particular project. So, and I know there were some, voicemails and miscommunications between this last week and telling some of the neighbors about what exactly was going to be on today's agenda, and there was some thought that perhaps we were much farther along than we were when we're not. We're at the very, very beginning of this. So again, I think communication on our end needs to be a little more expansive. We've heard this on some other issues as well, and it's a good lesson for us, and it can only, I think, serve the city well if we can do a better job getting our message out about what it is we're trying to do. I appreciate what Mr. Rouse said earlier about maybe we need to figure out, do some outreach and things like that. I think that's what this is actually going to do. It could be that assuming we move forward with this, Campbell and Campbell starts their public outreach meetings and have meetings like that, people might come and say, you know what, all it really needs is a little tweak here and a little tweak there, and we're done for, $250,000. That's possible. Or it might be, well, it would be really cool if we could do this or if we could do that, or it's something that could really revitalize the area just like Jardín de las Granadas did, and have that option and have that flexibility. So I think there's a wide range of what could come out of this and based on public input, but it really up to us, and that's the point of today's agenda item, is to start that process, is to start that public outreach. I also want to comment on the paint and carpet and other capital needs that is needed in the library and the findings that need to be made. And I would ask that we do look at that just one more time with a sharpened pencil as we go through the budget process and see if there's certain parts of any kind of library capital improvements inside that could be used with RDA funds, and maybe think about that. But I do think that paint and carpet and general upgrade of just general amenities is very different from, example, a seismic retrofit of the Fire Station 1. So those are two very different things in terms of making the finding for public safety and so forth. So I understand why there's been some kind of question of whether RDA funds could be used for those capital improvements. But maybe, with the new budget, now is an opportunity for us just to double check that, because certainly the library could use all the resources and help it can get. I think people generally take public libraries for granted and then when something happens and there's funding not there and it closes, or like during the furlough when it was closed, people say, wait a minute, my public library is not open, what's going on? And we want it to be a lively, vibrant, open place, and that front plaza is really part of the big picture there. So I think this is a good way to help the plaza, help the library, make families and our residents feel more comfortable and excited about going to this part of the cultural arts district. And I really look forward to hearing what the neighbors and residents have to say about what they'd like to see there. So I think this is the appropriate step in moving forward in that way. But again, you know, as much as we can get the messaging out front of the facts up front, the better I think we are in the long run. So those are my comments. I will be supporting the motion. Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Wrong button. Thank you. I agree with Mrs. Self. I mean, people are upset, and rightly so, about the way government spends money, and this is a lot of money. But the other side of the coin is these are dollars we're going to spend in town. This is almost like a mini stimulus program for the city of Santa Barbara, local design firm and all. And these are tangible and valuable assets. There's quite a large dollar amount assigned to an asset like the public library. And from a citizen's perspective, I almost think it may be irresponsible if we pass up an opportunity like this to maintain an asset that's as valuable as the library is to us. Not that I don't trust Governor Brown with our money, but I don't think sending it back to Sacramento might be our highest and best use of these funds. So I think this is a winner. I think this is going to be something that's going to have a positive financial impact on the community, and I will be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other lights on. There is a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay, it's 6-1. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to move to item number 14.
Item number 14, fiscal year 2011 mid-year review.
Okay, we're just waiting for some musical chairs over there. Okay, Mr. Livingston, or you'd like to start? Go right ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of council. My name is Rudy Livingston. I am the county manager for the city, and we are here today to present to you the mid-year report on the revenues expenditures through December 31st, 2010. To start off our presentation today, we will hear from Ms. Jill Tara, who is our Treasury Manager, and then I will give some information, and Mr. Samario will finish us off.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and members of council. I'm Jill Tara, Treasury Manager, and today we are here to discuss the mid-year results, financial results for the city. At mid-year, we have 6 months worth of data. And so that allows us at this point in the fiscal year to start making some meaningful analysis about how the revenues are performing, particularly the general fund revenues, and also begin to take a look at the preliminary and make some preliminary conclusions about where we think we'll end the year from a revenue standpoint. I'm going to go through 4 of the major tax revenues in the general fund. These would be sales tax, property tax, utility users tax, or UUT, and also our bed tax, our transient occupancy tax. The 4 of these major general fund revenues are budgeted at about $58 million a year, and that represents roughly about 58% of the general fund's revenue budget. So we'll focus the discussion on these 4 major revenues today. Up on the screen, you can see the sales tax table for this major revenue source. This is our second largest revenue source budgeted for fiscal year 11 at $16.44 million. That is a 1.6% decline from where we came in the year at the end of fiscal year 2010 at $16.7 million. However, I will note that we budgeted flat based on the information that we had through 3/4 of the way through the fiscal year last year, and we came in a little bit better than expected. So that means we can decline 1.6% this year and still meet budget. Now, as you know, sales tax comes in, the state advances us quarterly, and we get our cleanup payment a quarter in arrears. So at this point, 6 months through the fiscal year on an accrual basis, we only have 1 month's worth of hard data, and that would be the September quarter results. You can see that for the quarter ended September 30th, 2010, which is the first quarter of this fiscal year, our sales tax receipts were $4.4 million. That was growth of 3.9% over the $4.2 million that we received in the same quarter in fiscal year 10. Now you can see that we built on a huge decline last year, but we budgeted flat, and it's good news, so that came in ahead of where we thought we would be. Based on that information, and as well as what's happening with some of the other major general fund revenues and what we know about our local economy, we've revised our forecast for the end of the year. We believe at this point in the fiscal year, we're hoping that the December 31st quarter, which includes the Thanksgiving and holiday sales, will come in at 3%, which builds on that 3.3% decline that we saw last December quarter. For the March quarter, we're thinking that it will, our most likely scenario would be to come in at 2%, which is 0.4% growth over the last March quarter, or the March quarter of last year, and a 1% increase over the June 30th quarter of last year. You'll notice that in the June quarter in fiscal year 10, we're building on a 4% growth, so it's hard to, it would be pretty unlikely to have large growth on large growth like that in a single quarter. Anyway, if those preliminary projections hold, we'll end the year at $17.1 million, which would be a 2.7% increase over last year's results. That would leave us $680,000 positive budgetary variance, which is very good news. However, it just for perspective would put us back to the sales tax collections in fiscal year 2002. So we have still lost many years of growth, but it looks like we finally turned the corner into positive growth, at least in the sales tax, and we're hopeful that will hold. We'll move on to property tax. Property tax is our largest general fund revenue source at roughly $22 million. The adopted budget for this year was $22.79 million, which budgeted a 1.1% decline. Now, the historical growth over the last 5 years in this revenue source was growth of about 7.5% per year. So you can see the impact of the economic recession on this major revenue source for us. Our actual results in fiscal year 2009 came in at 3.6% growth, which is roughly half of what we were seeing on average from previous years. And then last fiscal year, we came in at a slight decline of 0.8%. We budgeted conservatively based on the information we had last year at a 1.1% decline, and we think we'll end the year pretty close to that with about a $53,000 positive budgetary variance. We're real comfortable with the top forecast, which is the property tax line, that $23 million. The bulk of that is from information based on the assessed roll that we get from the county. The next line down is supplemental property tax, and that is property tax levied on buyers of new properties. It's a tax on the difference between the assessed value and the market value of what a property sells at. So to the extent that properties are sold at more expensive than is on the assessed roll, we'll get a little bit extra in there. This particular piece of property tax is volatile and uncertain. However, you can see at the bottom of the slide, the supplemental through December came in at almost $166,000. So we're comfortable with that number based on the number of transactions that we've seen year-to-date fiscal year in terms of property transfers. And then finally, the county admin fees. I did want to note that on an adopted basis, we budgeted county property tax admin fees at $443,000, and you can see the history of that. 2009, it was $416,000. Fiscal year 2010, about $429,000, and we put a slight inflator in that. However, the property tax, once we got the information from the county for this fiscal year, we get that in November, I believe it is, came in at $550,000, and I did want to note for council that we are investigating the causes for that substantial increase, and it appears to be a change in the methodology with their cost allocations, but we're working with them to better understand that increase, and we'll report out with our the results of our findings. So we do expect this to roughly be on budget, and that's good news as our largest general fund revenue source. We'll move on to transient occupancy tax, which is our bed tax, and this is our big performer this year. As you know, I send out results monthly, and we really use this revenue in the city as a leading indicator for how we're doing locally. in many cases, sales tax is used as a leading indicator, but not for us. We get it 3 months in behind, and by that time, it's too late. Our bed tax, on the other hand, comes in at the 10th of the month from the hotels, so we know right away how it's doing. You can see the huge impact that the recession had on our bed tax in fiscal year 2009. It was down 6.9%. 2010, we ended the year down 4.8%, and we actually budgeted flat for fiscal year 2011 from where we thought we would end the year. We did a little bit better in the last few months of the fiscal year, particularly in May and June of 2010. You can see those huge growth, 6% and 12.1%, which means that we could decline 2.7% this year and still meet budget. However, if you look at the results for the first 6 months of the year, our year-to-date growth through December is 9.7%, and 4 of the 6 months we saw double-digit growth, so that's good news. In looking at where we think we'll end the year, we believe we'll end at right around $12.2 million with an overall 6.6% growth. We've assumed an overall average growth of 3% for the second half of the fiscal year, which will likely be easy to meet in January, where we're building on small growth, 0.8% growth, and that's also a smaller TOT month. The winter months are slower months for our bed tax. When we get to May and June, you'll see we'll be building on 6 and 12% growth. Those are also our larger sales tax month, where our TOT months where we bring in well over $1 million. So that's our best estimate at this point about where we think we'll end the year. And if we do achieve this year-end estimate, that would put us at $1.07 million over budget. So that would be good news. The final general fund tax that I'll discuss is utility users tax, and this is the most volatile of the major general fund revenue sources. It's budgeted and comes in about $7 million a year. And, it ranges from, 1 to 4% growth depending on the year and depending what's happening with demand, which is highly elastic, as well as commodity prices, which fluctuate greatly. It's really hard to forecast out where you think or where we think gas commodity prices are going to be, 15 months from now, but we do our best. So you can see over on the right-hand side, the year-to-date through December for the first 6 months of the year, our collections have come in at $3.5 million. That is roughly 50.1% of the budget has come in the first 6 months of the year. And also, if you annualize or you adjust it for a seasonal basis, which is the 3-year average, on average we collect roughly around 50.2% in the first 6 months of the year. So it looks like we're right on track to meet budget. We are underperforming in the telephone, refuse, and water sectors. However, gains in the electric and gas sectors seem to be floating us. So we'll watch this closely, but at this point we expect it to come in right around budget at the $7 million. So in summary, I think it's good to say that we have good news on the revenue front. We're expecting positive variances in sales tax and bed tax to the tune of about $1.75 million. We expect property tax and UUT to come in on budget, and any departmental revenue shortfalls that are expected by the end of the year are expected to be covered with at least a corresponding amount of expenditure savings, having a net effect on the budget. Now, Rudy will go through some of the budgetary issues and some of the mid-year adjustments that you'll be asked to approve today that will consume some of these surpluses. And there are some other contingencies out there, particularly with fire and the police and with overtime in the police and fire budgets that could consume the rest of that. On an ongoing
Mr. Hotchkiss actually has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Before we go
That's
there.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, just a quick comment, by the way. The formatting on that last slide was virtually unreadable from here. Just let you know if we use different colors in the future.
My
that
orange
one right
is
there.
too dark.
Yeah.
Yes.
The other thing was on the sales tax. I noticed that we project into the future 3%, 2%, and 1% for December, March, and June. What's that based on? I mean, that almost looks like a guess.
Well,
Do I go to the head of the class for that?
it's our best guess based on how we think the economy will recover. And based on the fact that if you look at the growth in the previous year for those same quarters, it's going to be easier to build on a decline in the March quarter than it is going to be to build on a huge, or not huge growth, but large growth for an economic recession in the fourth quarter. So
we're trying to be conservative there, is what you're saying.
Yes, we don't want to overestimate.
Thank you.
But it is based somewhat on a crystal ball analysis.
And I can assure you that when we get our March 15th sales tax, we relook at this, and then and on the bed tax, I'm down in finance on the 12th or 13th of the month. How do we do? And we're trying to be, conservative but also realistic. And if we need, we're hoping that we can make upward adjustments to help us balance next year's budget.
Thank you very much.
And to the extent, the last point I wanted to make is that we expect that probably these positive budget variances in these major revenues will be consumed with other things, budget issues that Mr. Livingston will now discuss. On an ongoing basis, I wanted to let you know that at the March 3rd budget work session, where Mr. Samario, the finance director, presented the multi-year forecast, we have factored these positive variances in. So on an ongoing basis, it helps us, but it's already been factored into that $3 million that you took a look at. So anything better than that will help the problem for the next 2-year financial plan. But at least right now, what you've just seen has already been factored into the balancing. With that, I'll turn it over to Rudy Livingston, the accounting manager, who will go through the expenditure side of the general fund and then briefly discuss some key issues and events in the enterprise funds. Thank you.
Thank you. See, she likes to give you guys the good news and tell you that I have to give you some bad news, but it's not all bad. We will be discussing some proposed adjustments to the budget, but that will be after we discuss the general fund expenditures and also the enterprise funds. Excuse me. Those of you on council have seen this format of a schedule many times before. It's basically a reproduction of what is located on page 5 of attachment 2 to the agenda report, where we discuss the expenditures for the general fund. We start off with the annual adjusted budget, which includes the adopted budget plus any supplemental appropriations that have been made during the year and any carryover items that were added to the budget. From that number, we multiply it by 50%, realizing that general fund expenditures roughly occur approximately it's pro rata throughout the entire year. And so because 75% of our general fund expenditures are salaries and benefits, and most of those employees are here with us the entire year, we use that 50% standard when we calculate our year-to-date budget. So the year-to-date actual is what we've actually spent through this time. This does not include encumbrances. The encumbrances, for those of you who want to know about that information, is on the far right-hand side of this report. I am not going to be discussing those today. Encumbrances generally are obligations that we have to make purchases or have consume funds throughout the rest of the year or maybe into the following year, and they can distort our numbers significantly. So on the mid-year, we're leaving those out. So the year-to-date column includes the actual expenditures through December 31st. If you look at the bottom of the next column, you look to see that we have a variance of 0.6% at mid-year, which is $646,000 positive compared to what our year-to-date budget is. I will briefly discuss, there are 3 departments in there that have negative variances at December 31st, and I will briefly discuss those. The first one is the City Attorney's Office, where they have a $23,000 negative variance at mid-year. And this is primarily due to a retirement that occurred at the very beginning of the year, and we had to cash out some vacation time that was accrued. And while that was cashed out at the beginning of the year, that doesn't get annualized, and so that will work its way through towards the end of the year, and the department expects that they will be within budget and there will be no problems at the end of the year. The second one is the police department, we see that there's a $187,000 negative variance at December 31st. This is primarily due to overtime costs incurred at the very beginning of the year for the fiesta and the 4th of July celebrations that we have here in the city. Once again, that is anticipated to work its way through, and at the end of the year, they should be within budget. However, we have seen some issues that potentially there might be some overages on salaries and benefits in the police department. We do have about $200,000 of appropriated reserve budgeted that we would be using to cover any costs that are there in excess of what is budgeted. If we're seeing some trends and we see there are some issues with this, we will bring this back to you in the third quarter report that we will be giving you sometime probably April or May.
Madam Mayor, just to clarify on that, you recall we were directed to do some overhiring in the police department, and we put some money aside for that purpose. So they are engaged in that. At this point, it looks like the savings from vacancies in the police department are sufficient to offset those costs for overhiring. But we're going to monitor that. It's possible we may need some of that appropriated reserve by year end, but it looks like today that they would not need those funds.
Okay, I'm going to ask you, since we're on that. Sure. Every year we pay a lot of overtime in the summer for Old Spanish Days and Solstice. Mm-hmm. So why isn't 4th of July? That's right, solstice is the end of the year, not the beginning of the year. Why not then put that expense in the first half of the year? Why do you have to just annualize out the salaries instead of putting in a lump sum in the first quarter of the fiscal year? Because it just happens it's a constant. It's not like we know we're going to spend, we know it's going to happen. So why not account for it as part of the expenses for the first half of the year, as opposed to making it look like we are, off budget in mid-year?
Madam Mayor, actually that's what we do. We show the costs in the period in which they are incurred. So the problem is that the budget is a straight line number. When we
That's fine, but
so we could present to you that year-to-date budget column as kind of seasonally adjusted for a few of those things, and then it wouldn't show as a variance. But it's such a small item relative to the $50 million budget. It's just for me, it's easier to explain that we're always going to show an over budget situation or status in mid-year for the police department because of the overtime costs incurred in the first half of the year that won't incur the second half of the year.
Okay, so if the variance was much larger than what you thought the overtime would have cost during that quarter, then we'd be saying, okay, maybe we think we're going to spend more than
Absolutely.
what we budgeted at
Right.
the end of the year, so we need to act on that sooner.
Yeah, we look into the numbers in a lot of detail, so we'll know if there's a $500,000 variance in mid-year that it's not the overtime
That's unusual.
for those kind of special events.
Okay, it just happens every year, so it always looks like the police department is overspending its budget when we know that big expense happens at the beginning of the fiscal year. So I don't know, it's just one of those things.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And by the way, that $187,000 is roughly what the overtime was for Fiesta. So, there's other things in there too. At December 31st, the fire department is $423,000 roughly over budget. And this is primarily due to overtime issues that they've had. This fiscal year, they've had an abnormal amount of firefighters out on sick leave or on long-term medical leave. And so when they have that, they're required to backfill and cover shifts, and they have a minimum level of staffing that we keep at all times. And so when we have these abnormalities, they have to cover it through the overtime, and that's what we're seeing right there. We've been talking with the fire department personnel, and they believe that some of this is going to normalize throughout the remainder of the year, as a lot of those people that were out on leave have since retired, and so there won't be the requirement for backfilling overtime such as we had in the first part of the year. So this is one item that for sure we will be bringing back to you in the third quarter review to kind of give you a heads up of where we are at this point in time, because we may need to request supplemental appropriations for the fire department related to this item. And that is all that I have to say regarding the general fund expenditures, unless there are questions.
Mr. Hotchkiss has a question.
Regarding what your remarks about the fire department, some of those people are no longer there. Was this an expense incurred sort of preparatory to a kind of a tactical move to get more money according to their contract and then retire? You follow what I'm saying here?
I can't speak towards that. I mean,
I see Andy sauntering up.
Chief Demetrio, you want to come on
If
up?
Chief wants to address that, that would be wonderful.
The primary issue is two. One, we had several employees who were injured on duty, and what you're seeing there is that we have to pay those folks who are injured, plus we have to backfill with overtime.
I understand.
And so with the number of hours that we had of folks injured this year are much higher than we've had over the last 3 or 4 years. That's the primary issue. It also turns out that several of those folks chose to retire either as a result of their injuries or, and I'm not going to make any issues about, did they plan to do this. We try and monitor that. We make sure that, when they're injured, that they truly are injured. If they're on sick leave, we have controls where we have them bring in doctor's notices and things like that. But this is an abnormal year for injuries, and I know that the chief is looking at it very carefully because we talk about it every month.
Sure.
Chief, do you want to add anything?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss, this was like a perfect storm type situation for the fire department where a lot of things came together. The biggest part is, as I mentioned, the injuries that we accrued. We typically see about 2,500 hours of injuries, and this year we've seen 4,600 in the first 6 months. So we had a lot of injuries, and I believe it was a generational type thing. A lot of these firefighters had 30 plus years on the job. And they have since retired. So I believe we'll see this normalize over the next 6 months, and we're looking at it very closely.
If I could follow up, because it is a pretty marked increase. I mean, they were 30-year firefighters, but last year they were 29-year-old firefighters. So it didn't like they, aged 10 years in a year. I know in the last several budget cycles when we were looking at positions and I can't remember if we kept the training captain or kept things open, and part of the training aspect I've always thought was sort of an insurance policy to prevent against illness and injury on the job, which, as you can see, has a cost to it. And I don't know if in your analysis you could see, have we cut something as part of the general operations of the department in terms of training and safety measures? Not safety like they're going to be in danger, but, extra things that we were doing that for some reason we had to cut that maybe we should think about bringing back in the next budget cycle, because you could see the consequence if there is a correlation. And I'm not saying there is, but it might be something to analyze as you're looking at why there's such a marked increase in number of hours off the job due to illness or injury.
Madam Mayor, yes, this is something we're looking at very closely. At the beginning of the year, about 4 months ago, I initiated a fitness and wellness committee as part of our safety committee. So they're actively looking at this ways to look at the fitness level of our firefighters. Unfortunately, a lot of the injuries occurred to our firefighters that were actually located at our airport fire station, which is unusual, but maybe it relates to their activity level there. So we're implementing a rotation system. We're looking overall at a comprehensive program to bring up our fitness levels to limit our injuries.
Great. Well, I appreciate that, because not only it's obviously a cost issue, but really we don't want to see our firefighters get injured or get ill anyway. So whatever we can do to try to prevent that would be
Yes, and this
good.
is a cooperative effort with the Firefighters Association,
Good to
too.
hear. Some other lights came on. Mr. Rouse and then Mr. House.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Chief, rookie question here. So in the overall budget, is there a capital component to that as well, or is this all salaries and benefits?
This is salaries and benefits.
I remember a couple years ago we received pretty significant income from the mutual aid that we provided to other agencies, and but we weren't really called on for that this last year and a half or so. Does that figure into this in any way? I mean, that was something that we were really proud of, and we were training others, and we were really engaged with other agencies. But this time around, it doesn't seem like we're doing that.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, this was a historically slow activity year for us, and as it was across the state, in the western United States, the fire activity was really low compared to 2 years ago, where we were budgeting over $2 million in revenue for mutual aid. We saw also a business trend that had changed in the way firefighters and resources were ordered up. In response to that, we brought our mutual aid revenues down to about $1.25 million this year, but even that, it was below. Our revenues were far below that this year.
So that also figures into this number as well.
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
Well, that's a good thing. Less mutual aid means less fires. Right, so that's okay. Yeah, Mr. Livingston?
That's correct. I want to clarify, the revenue does not come into these numbers we're talking about here, but it does relate to them as it relates to the overtime required to fight those fires. And so as an adjustment, we'll be talking about that at the end of the presentation. We will be requesting that council reduce the estimated revenues for mutual aid and also reduce the appropriations for mutual aid overtime.
Thank you very much for that clarification. I didn't catch that. I was mixing the two. Thank you.
Are there any other questions on the general fund?
Any other questions? No, go right ahead.
Okay. Then
Thank you, Chief.
we'll shift to the enterprise funds. The enterprise fund revenues are computed on a seasonal. The year-to-date budget is computed based upon a seasonal collection period for those revenue sources, because they're impacted each year by. There's a lot of seasonality in the water fund, in the waterfront fund, the airport fund, all of the funds, and so we compute the year-to-date percentage based upon that 3-year average. And compared to the 3-year average collection rate, there are a couple of areas that I wanted to address. First of all, the water fund revenues are lagging behind at that year-to-date budget by about $587,000. This is really attributable to the wet weather that we had in the first 6 months of the year. It was wet, it was cool, and water production was actually down about 5%, and revenues were also down significantly. We're not sure exactly how the revenues will fare in the rest of the year, because that'll depend a lot on weather patterns that we see. But staff is expecting at this point in time that they will end the year under their budgeted revenues. And so they are taking measures to reduce expenditures to offset most, if not all, of the revenue shortfall that they're expecting at this time. Some of those come right hand in hand, such as treatment costs will be less because we aren't having to produce as much water. But the staff has indicated that there was approximately 3 times the normal rainfall in the first 6 months than what we normally have, and we who were here experienced that, and we would probably agree to that. So we'll keep an eye on this, and we will, if we need to, we'll come back to you later on in the year. But at this point in time, staff is expecting a negative variance, and they will offset it with expenditure cuts. In the airport, we actually have a positive revenue variance at mid-year, and that is because the good news is that the passenger counts have been picking up again. And this is perfect timing as we're about ready to move into the new terminal. It's been delayed. It was supposed to be originally April, but I think it's now May or June. And so these passenger counts are coming up, and our capacity will be increasing right at the right time. So this is really good. Fuel sales have been up. Virtually every sector that they track has been showing positive growth this year, and they anticipate that it will continue to be positive throughout the remainder of the year. The last one that I want to discuss is waterfront fund revenues. They're approximately $249,000 below the year-to-date budget. And this is attributable to 2 main factors. First of all, the cool and wet, foggy summer that we had, and fall kept a lot of visitors away. So the parking revenues in all of the parking lots is down significantly from where they were anticipating it to be. It was an interesting phenomenon that they explained to me, that many times you would have fog and clouds on one side of Cabrillo Boulevard, and on the other side it was sunny. So, and the traffic at the beaches was down significantly. We're not sure exactly how that will end the year, but they are expecting a bit of a negative variance in the revenues for parking. The other thing that has impacted their mid-year numbers is slip transfer fees. And they found that slip transfer fees are very difficult to project, and they have been somewhat tracking the real estate market. They are down significantly from what we were budgeting at mid-year. The good news is that waterfront staff has indicated that there seems to have been a little bit of an uptick on those in January and February. So the numbers by the end of the year may not be quite as bad, but at this point in time, we are expecting to be overall under budgeted revenues. And they also are taking steps to reduce expenditures accordingly and to make sure that they balance out their losses with their expenditures. That's all that I have to say regarding the enterprise funds, unless there are any questions.
I don't see any lights on.
Well, then we will move on to the proposed adjustments for mid-year. There are probably more adjustments than we normally have. Some of them are pretty pro forma, but I'm going to go through all of them rather quickly so that we can understand what they're about. If there are any questions, I would be more than happy to stop and explain them in a little bit more detail. We'll start off in the Administrative Services Department. The city clerk has requested an additional $20,000 of appropriations to cover election costs for the special election we held last year on medical marijuana issues. Earlier, we projected that it was going to be about a $50,000 bill, and because there were additional agencies and cities getting involved in the countywide elections, that reduced our overall costs. So they're requesting an additional $20,000 to cover those costs. The next one is the fire department, where mutual aid revenues, as Chief indicated, are down significantly, and we are proposing that we reduce estimated revenues from mutual aid a little over $900,000 at mid-year. Now, the offset to that is we're also proposing that we reduce budgeted overtime for mutual aid incidents by $550,000. However, if you do the math, you'll notice that there is about a $450,000 shortfall that's inherent in that equation there. And we're going to have to we will be paying for these things out of the additional revenues that we're going to be getting in the general fund, as Ms. Tara explained, so they'll be offset. One other adjustment that they are requesting is a reduction of estimated revenues for $100,000 for when the budget was being discussed and adopted last year. The department was looking at the possibility of charging a fee when we respond to accidents, and especially when there's hazmat complications. After discussions with the city attorney's office, it was determined that this probably wasn't the course that we wanted to take at this point in time. However, this was not removed from the budget that was adopted, and so at this time we're asking to reduce our estimated revenues by $100,000 because we know that we will not be receiving this revenue. The next item on there is related to bargain labor concessions, and I'm going to postpone that for a moment because we have a slide that we're going to go over with these labor concessions. The fire department is requesting $40,000 to purchase portable defibrillator units. They keep these in all of their fire trucks, and when they respond to calls, they are quite often using these defibrillators. They have purchased some units a few years in the past, and the company that they purchased them from was acquired by another company who decided that they weren't going to maintain this line of equipment. So we are unable to buy batteries and replacement parts, and so the department felt that it was prudent to purchase new equipment, and they are requesting an additional $40,000 of appropriations for that purpose. To help pay for that, they are requesting to increase estimated revenues by $52,000, and this was an insurance reimbursement that we received for water damage that was done to the fire administrative offices. We recovered $52,000 from the landlord's insurance company, and so we are proposing that we use this for purchase of that equipment. The The adjustments requested for the police department are related to labor negotiations, which we will discuss later, as are the non-departmental adjustments. In total, you can see that we are indicating that total adjustments for the general fund are going to result in $809,000 of use of reserves, or in this case, use of the additional budget, the additional revenues that we're anticipating from our non-departmental revenues. We are not asking to increase any budgets for those revenues, so that money will be used to offset these costs here. And at year end, we anticipate that this will be fully covered and we will not have to use net reserves for this purpose. The next item on here is the county library fund. We maintain the library system. Well, we're contracted by the county of Santa Barbara to maintain a library system where we have branch offices in various locations. One of those is Goleta. We received a $4,000 contribution specifically for the Goleta Library that was stipulated that they should be using that money for the acquisition of children's books. And so we're requesting that council approve an increase in appropriations for book acquisitions, and that will be paid for by this donation, and we're asking to increase the estimated revenues by that same amount. The next one is in the Streets Grant Capital Fund. This fund accounts for capital projects that are funded by grants primarily from the federal government and the state government. As these projects are completed or we realize that there's going to be no more funding for these, we make adjustments, and at this point that's what we're trying to do here. The first three items, we're actually not going to be receiving any more revenues for those items, and so we've requested that we reduce the budgets related to those and the expenses, the expenditures that were budgeted for those. The next three items are projects for which we will be receiving some additional grant money. And so we are asking to appropriate additional, to budget additional appropriations there, and also to increase their estimated revenues. The net effect of these is a zero net effect on fund balance. It is a strict offset between revenues and expenditures. It's important that we bring these projects and these items to council because these things they're under your direction, and so you folks need to know what is going on and be approving when we're reprogramming funds. The Measure D fund, people often tell me, well, Measure D is over. Well, Measure D is not over. The revenue stream for Measure D is over. There were funds that have been accumulated in the Measure D fund for capital streets projects, and those are going to continue on. Hopefully by the end of this year they will be expending all of those funds that have been available. In this case here, we had a commitment for the Goleta Transportation Improvement Plan. That commitment has expired, and so we're asking to reprogram $133,000 that was budgeted for that to be used for two purposes. One is the Hollister Avenue sidewalk infill, which is a project that is in the same vicinity as the original project, and then also an additional $65,000 to go towards the Ortega Bridge project. The city has a matching requirement on that bridge project, and so we're anticipating using this money for our portion or a portion of that match. This is a qualified project under Measure D, and so it's a net zero effect, and so we're just asking to reprogram some money, basically. The last one that we wanted to talk on for the adjustments is in the internal services funds and the information systems. The information systems have fully implemented our GIS system that we have now that allows us to map and see all kinds of neat things throughout the city. Once the implementation was completed, we now have a requirement to pay licensing fees on that, and due to the timing of the completion of that project, these were not included in the budget for this year. So the information systems staff are requesting that we increase appropriations by $31,700 to cover this year's licensing, and then they will include future years in their budgets, and also another $5,500 for training on that software. And that concludes this portion of the adjustments. Now we want turn our attention to this item, this year-end variance, and Mr. Samario is going to speak to that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for your patience on all of this. I know it's fascinating. So, just wanted to go over some of the adjustments we're proposing to police and fire, but it's in a greater context, and I thought we'd show you a separate schedule, that's how it's all kind of coming together. So, the first line represents the number you've seen in the past. We have it every year. It's the anticipated year-end variance, and as I said at Finance Committee, historically we've had a number there that we budgeted to represent what we expected to generate in savings on expenditures each year, because we always do, where there's always vacancies, turnover, and those kinds of things. And again, in the past, it also included what we expected to generate in surpluses on the revenue side. It's ironic because this year we've only provided an amount for expenditure savings, yet we are going to be generating surpluses this year, which is kind of an unusual event in the last few years. But again, it's an amount for just the expenditure side. We're expecting to achieve that. But you'll never see a revenue actually being realized in that account because the savings, if you will, is on the expenditure side. So that's something you're familiar with. The rest of it is unrelated to that, but kind of similar in nature. As you know, when we adopted the budget, there were some concessions that we were still trying to negotiate with police and fire. And so we didn't know what those amounts were going to be. We had some targets, and so we established in the adopted budget a revenue, even though it was going to materialize ultimately as an expenditure savings, but we plugged it as a revenue as amounts anticipated from concessions. In that number, we also included the concessions we realized and actually achieved by the time we adopted the budget for the other labor groups relating to vacation cash outs that were suspended. That was, in most cases, there was an element where they were suspending their vacation cash out as part of the overall concession. So even though we had negotiated those, we didn't include that in their respective departments' budgets for expenditures because we never budgeted and never do budget the vacation cash outs. So we always reflect those savings in an anticipated year-end variance number, if you will. So you can see in total what we included in the adopted budget for all those concessions, both those that were achieved for vacation cash outs and those that hadn't been achieved for fire and police, totaling $2.4 million. If you go over all the way to the right, you can see that the balance of all those, because I'm going to kind of work in backwards, what we're proposing is to remove all but $726,000 of those amounts. That number there represents the vacation cash outs that we are going to realize as actual cash savings. Even though we don't budget and therefore aren't going to see any kind of variance there that's favorable, we are going to see a reduction in our costs that we normally would every year because those things do go out as cash. And what we're estimating those concessions to be valued at is $726,000, and that's the amount that's going to be left in that account. It won't ever be realized as a revenue again. It'll just be expenditure savings. So really, we're going to end up with a $1.2 million up above in the normal anticipated year-end variance in that account, and a sister account of $726,000, almost $2 million, that'll show as the number of year-end variance that we'll never realize on the revenue side, but on the expenditure side. In the middle, you'll see that we're proposing to allocate some of those concessions that we had included in the adopted budget on the revenue side for police and fire and allocate them back to their departmental budgets. We know now what those amounts are. For example, in the Fire Association, you can see $635,000 in concessions were actually realized. And so we're saying let's put those now into their budget so we can reflect those savings in that budget. Same with POA and with PMA. So we're just proposing moving $1,298,000 out of this account into the respective departments' expenditure accounts, a reduction of those expenditure accounts so our budget reflects what we expect to see at the end of the year. The number to the right of that, $342,000, represents concessions that we didn't achieve, at least not this year. For example, in the Fire Association, what we realized this year was $635,000, which is short of the $706,000 we estimated. And similarly in POA, we were short. Now, keep in mind, though, when we were developing these estimates, we were thinking about a one-year concession agreement. In the end, we all ended up with 3-year concession agreements. So some of that is it wasn't all lost concessions. We sort of pushed it back to some savings next year we're going to generate. So it's not really we're losing $342,000, where some of that we're actually pushing back to the next year. But that's really the difference this year between what we budgeted and what we realized. So all of that is just to say that we've got all these monies in these anticipated year-end variance accounts. We're looking to adjust, move, and some of it leave intact based on the nature of those savings. So hopefully that's clear or somewhat clear, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And fascinating.
Yes.
Yes. Any questions? No. Is that, so you need a motion from us, though,
That's
to
correct.
approve all of these?
I'd
good
like to make a
things.
motion.
Mr. Francisco.
I move that the council accept the 2011 interim financial statements for the 6 months ended December 31st, 2010, and that we approve the changes to appropriations and estimated revenues.
Second that.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Great, that passes. Thank you very much for that report. Any council member committee assignment reports? Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I attended the Water Commission meeting yesterday, and at that meeting, a draft of the long-term water supply plan was presented, and I believe that's on our schedule for a joint session with the Water Commission sometime later in the next couple of months, as I recall. But they're making good progress on it.
Okay. Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Downtown Parking Committee met and gave a positive review of the credit card updates and usage so far by customers. We seem to realize some revenue increase, whether that's due to credit card use or just business getting better. We're not really sure. Lot 10, construction is underway. Signage was improved for circulation for drivers. It was first tested out to be signage for pedestrians, and we figured out it was probably better to get signage for drivers in place, so we did. And finally, there's a letter drafted by the chair to the city council that should be arriving soon regarding the budgets and the upcoming years.
Great, thank you.
That was it.
Anyone else? A couple things on my end. On Friday afternoon, thanks to the redevelopment agency staff, we coordinated a conference call with Assemblymember Doss Williams about the proposed governor's budget and eliminating redevelopment agency funds. And included in the conference call was myself, RDA staff, Rob Fredericks from the City Housing Authority, Mark Melchiori from Melchiori Construction, and 2 members from Penfield and Smith, because we thought the ones that get contracts from the city and for local jobs for RDA projects wanted to give our assembly member their point of view about what the elimination of RDA funds would mean. We'll see where that conversation goes, but it was, a very lively one. And then on Saturday, I did attend Russ Hicks Memorial Service in San Ynez. It was at the San Ynez High School in the field, and actually I couldn't count how many people, but it was very well attended. SB CAG Executive Director Jim Kemp gave comments, as well as former Buellton Mayor Victoria Pointer and their family and so forth also have comments. And so very well attended, very nice service, and as you know, we adjourned in his honor, I think last week or the week prior to that. So I was there last Saturday. Anything else? Okay. We do not have a council meeting next week, so for those listening, we'll see you in 2 weeks. This meeting's adjourned.